So you were making this docu-series between 2020, 2022. Can you please tell us? I noticed this not just in your work, but in the works of many people who are investigating these things, but also in horror movies. How most of this paranormal stuff, they're usually happening some deserted or rural places, places with that they don't have many population. They're like villages or mountains or forests. How come most of these paranormal events usually happen in those places compared to cities? I'm currently in Chicago, and here people say, well, some people say they think they saw Mothman. They call him the Lake Michigan Mothman, whatever. But usually things of that sort, of something more scary, or things that happen in higher intensity, they happen in places uh, like in West Virginia, which you're from. Is there any explanation why is there more eyewitness reports and accounts in places like that?
Yeah, so there are multiple ways of going about answering that question, or ways that you might think about it. So one would be just psychologically, people in cities, things are more fixed in place, and your world is more populated by, you might say, points of interest, right? The buildings, the maps, everything's fairly populated. In a more rural setting, it is not this way. Things are more transient, and you're also more plugged into the rhythm of the land moving through. It's just seasons changing. That has more effect on you as a rural person than it does in the city, where you're sort of more insulated from what nature's doing. Another way to think about it is these things tend to happen to and happen in marginal or liminal spaces. So marginal spaces would be spaces at the margins where we don't tend to place a ton of our attention. It's called flyover country for a reason. It doesn't occupy much of the public consciousness. So that, as well as the people, particularly in Appalachia, so this is a less psychological answer and possibly a stranger answer. The Appalachian Mountains are some of the oldest mountains on Earth, and they actually run under the Atlantic Ocean all the way to Ireland. And oddly enough, the white people who settled in Appalachia are the Scotch Irish from the exact same mountain range across the ocean, and brought with them much of their folklore, much of their religious and spiritual practices and beliefs. So many of the same types of phenomena, though we may give them different names, occur here as occur there. In Ireland, they have the Dwatha de Danann, or the Fae. Fae worship is a thing that occurs in the Appalachians now here, an ocean away, but the same mountain range and essentially the same spirits being worshipped. In addition to that, even prior to the Scots-Irish settling here, the native population, the Shawnee and the Cherokee that were in the area, they would hunt and battle in West Virginia, but they wouldn't settle. They would not have settlements here. They referred to it as the dark and bloody ground. That was Appalachia. And whether there's some truth to the idea that they were picking up on something that is true about the land, or whether it just sort of, folklore attaches to violent events and vice versa, and it sort of all spirals together to create that perception, maybe that's part of it as well. I think there is something to the idea of cosmic geography, of there being such a thing as sacred or desecrated space, and that somehow geography plays into spiritual warfare in some way. So we know that, for instance, in Daniel, when the angel that comes to visit Daniel is hindered by the prince of Persia, that spiritual being is associated with Persia, and in some way, geography had to play into that conflict because the angel is using his conflict with the Prince of Persia to explain a temporal delay. He's saying, sorry, it took me so long. I was engaged with this spiritual being associated with this geographic place. So there is, I think we're well within scriptural bounds to extrapolate from that, that there are spiritual beings tied to certain geographical places. Now, what causes that to be the case, that's the Heiser has written extensively on, and we could further speculate. I mean, in the series, we came to find out, I don't want to totally spoil it, but the girl in question in the series was engaged in worship of an entity that shares a huge amount of archetypal imagery with the Shawnee creator deity. And so, the Shawnee recognized that entity, or something that shares all of that imagery. They recognize that as their creator entity in this space for hundreds of years before we arrived. And then the same sort of thing is worshipped by, someone generations later here. I think it would be kind of silly not to observe the pattern there. So I don't know if that answers the question, but there are several ways of thinking about why it's rural, why it's liminal mostly, and marginal areas.